So working with the live trace feature in Illustrator, basically what that allows you to do is fairly accurately trace placed images. And it allows you to convert images into vector graphics. And you would do that for a variety of reasons, because you want to make something sort of more illustrative, or you want to make something vector so that you don't have to worry about pixelization issues that we talked about. You don't have to worry about resolution with vector images, things like that. And you can do pretty photorealistic, which we'll get into later in the semester. You can create photorealistic vector images, right? You know, you can pretty much think about it like working with, you know, an opaque paint. You know, the more detail, the more colors, the more brush strokes, obviously the more detailed your painting is, right? Same thing sort of can apply in Illustrator. You just have more and more shapes on top of shapes to create more and more detail, right? So this is where we can get into sort of starting to mess around with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place an image in my document, just under File, Place, and I'm going to grab this black and white photo, and I'm going to place it. And again, when we bring up our placed images, you get this preview, and it's showing you how many. You can see the 1 of 1. You can load multiple images when you're placing images. So it'll tell you if you have, you know, 3 ready to go, 4, 40, whatever. And if you just click once, it places the image at actual size. You can also click and drag if you have it a specific size that you want to place. Keeping that in mind, if you place anything larger, like right now at 155%, this is fairly decent resolution, right? It's pretty small though, about 1.5 by 1 3/4 ish, give or take. So if we were to make that bigger, let's go back to this place, and let's say we drag it however big. That's not terrible. It's also going to depend on the resolution of the photo. This photo might have more resolution, like might be 600 ppi. But anyway, so you can arbitrarily, I just kind of made it 4.5 by 5 3/4 ish. So you have your placed image, and you'll see once you click on the image, you have your information here, your size, your position on the artboard, your opacity. You can crop or mask. You can embed. You can edit the original. Basically, embedding, which we'll get into again later, but embedding an image into a file basically means that it's no longer a linked file. So it's actually part of the file. So you don't have to worry about not including that linked image. If you're working on another machine or handing it off to somebody else, the drawback to embedding images into your files is it creates larger file sizes because they're actually like part of the file instead of a linked image. A linked image, if you had a 1 gig placed image, that gig isn't going to affect your Illustrator file size at all. It's the file size of the image, right? But if you embed that 1 gig image into your Illustrator file is now at least 1 gig bigger, right? We'll get into that much later. Anyway, so you see here at the top here we have our image trace button, and you can also bring this drop down here, that arrow. If you just hit image trace, it automatically does whatever the default is. But you see we have a variety of options: high fidelity photo, low fidelity, 3 color, 6 color, 16, etc., etc. And you can edit all of these. So right now I'm just going to do 3 colors, and you can see it really simplified the image down to 3 colors. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on where is it? This guy here, to bring up our image trace here, our image trace options. You can also go in a window and bring this up. So now you can see you have your image trace palette, and you can bring, if you wanted to do something a little bit more custom, 5 colors, and you can see it brings in a little bit more into her face. Let's go with 8 colors. There we go. Try to break this background from her cheek a bit. And you can also, under advanced here, you have a whole bunch of different options. Path fitting, basically sort of how loose or tight to the original image does the function work. And a lot of this is really kind of trial and error. This is definitely where I have the preview button going. Let's bring that way up and see if it changes much. Yeah, the paths aren't really changing much there. A touch, but you can see when you're tracing something that's a little bit more like a logo or something, you'll see. And then corner fittings, this is where it's going to either make corners smoother. Again, with the photo, it's not really doing a whole lot. Let's bring this up. And my progress window, or progress bar, is in my other window, which is kind of annoying. There you go. You can see that kind of changed a bit there. Like you can see the changes happening here. So with a photo like this, it's just something you kind of would play around with until you get your desired result. You have your method. This is going to vary, again, depending on what you want to do. Having abutting paths, it basically creates cutout paths, meaning that each one of these shapes is completely separate, kind of like that motorcycle from way beginning of the semester, if you guys remember. And if we were to move, once we expand this, if we were to move this piece here, it would be white underneath. Or if you did overlapping paths, it basically creates stacked paths. So it creates, like, you know, whatever color, like this color would still be behind this color. So what it tries to do, it works pretty well. Basically what it tries to do is it tries to create, you know, basically like this. It's pretty much like layered, yeah, like layered pieces. So you'd have like this color, you'd have essentially, theoretically, a big block of this kind of purpley color, and then this block would be on top of that one, and then this one would be on top, and so forth and so on. That's super handy if you don't want that that abutting cutout paths. You know what I mean? If you drag that out, and if you don't want basically a hole in your artwork. So that's just going to be a decision depending on what application you're using it for. You can snap curves to lines. I don't think it's going to do much with our photo here. A little bit. A touch, yeah. And again, with photos, these are going to be sort of minor. And then lastly, you can ignore white. I don't think it's going to do, again, there's not a whole lot of white. Like if you're tracing, I don't know, if you're tracing like more of a line art image you got, and it has a white background, you can do ignore white, and it won't trace like the bounding box of your image. So if this background was white, let's say, like it would start the trace around her head, and it wouldn't include this. And again, here there's not really white to ignore there. So I'm just going to uncheck that. And then I'm just going to do this really quick so I can I try to grab my progress bar so it's in the same window, and it's not letting me. Anyway, you'll see once you start doing this, when you get more and more complicated traces, you'll see the progress bar. You'll see your progress bar pop up. Mine's popping up on my other monitor, so it's not showing here. But you'll see it pop up with more complicated traces, and the more things you do, the longer it'll take to trace. With these machines, it shouldn't take too long to trace really anything, but you'll see on your own, if you mess around with it, you know, the more detailed you make these, the longer your progress takes, and any of these adjustments will make that progress bar happen. So once we've sort of decided that we like our image. I'll zoom in a little bit. A little too much. We like our image about this much detail. So you're going to select it, and we're going to hit expand here. So what we're going to do is, that's exactly what it says, convert tracing object into paths. So what we're going to do is we're going to expand it, and now you'll see it's actually broken it up into its separate paths. These are automatically grouped, so if you wanted to break them apart individually, you would just have to ungroup them. You can go object ungroup, and then now they're. So this is where the abutting paths versus the stacked paths. If this were a stacked path, this color would be all the way around the bounding box. But you see now we can break this apart if we wanted to. If you wanted to get rid of, I'm going to go back to a grouped object so it's all together. And then this is just my little quirk. I always do, like if I group something, I always tend to move it just to see if I forgot anything. And then I just undo. That's just my goofy thing. I noticed I do that a lot and never told you what I do. So from here, you can manipulate these shapes just like any other vector object. Oops. I'm going to zoom in a little, use my direct select tool, and if you wanted to manipulate curves with our resize handles, if you wanted to change points, etc., etc. So you can adjust from there. You can also change the color of any of these. Let's say we wanted to go, oops, I just moved that by accident. You know, you wanted to go a little bit, give or take, we'll select the pieces that are similar colors. Let's say we wanted to go a little bit more sort of Warhol-y with this. You can select areas that you want to change. Might help if I zoom in here. You get the idea. And you can change all of these. I'm not going to get too crazy, but change some of the shadows to a little bit darker green. So you can kind of get more illustrative with it, depending on what you wanted to do. I know I picked some lovely colors here for her, but just to sort of show you the idea. So that's one of the things that you can do with the image trace. Basically, you know, changing the colors or editing the paths would be one of the reasons you would do an image trace. But basically what you're doing is you are taking a raster image and you're essentially converting it into vector graphics.